Hello. Excuse me. Hello. My name is Jonathan Freebert, and I am Director of External Affairs here at Microsoft, and I manage the Voices for Innovation community. Welcome to what I think will be a terrific and interesting webinar, Navigating Turbulence, Global Policy and Market Trends for Tech in 2017. And with us today, and I'm really excited about the two guests that we have with us today. Um, they are, I'm going to go to the next slide, um, Paul Triolo and Alexander
Triolo.
Clement. Triolo, thank you. Sorry,
Yeah.
Triolo
Oh,
and Alexander Clement. As Jonathan Freebird, I have my name messed up a lot too, so I apologize. So Paul is the practice head for Geotechnology, and he leads the Eurasia Group's newest practice. So he is focusing on global technology policy issues like cybersecurity, internet governance, and some emerging areas such as automation, AI, big data. Prior to joining the Eurasia Group, Paul served in senior positions within the U.S. government for more than 25 years, focusing primarily on China's rise as a science and technology and a cyber power. There, he provided analytical support to the president and senior policymakers. He also has experience working in Silicon Valley. Alexander is a director of Eurasia's research, focusing on the political economy, fiscal and monetary issues, and foreign policy of Russia and other post-Soviet states. As a founding member of the Emerging Markets Strategy practice, he focuses on comparative political and social trends across emerging markets. Prior to joining Eurasia Group, Alex worked as a journalist for the Financial Times and the Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt Institute. So I'm pleased to have both Paul and Alexander with us today, and I just wanted to state at the outset that the views that they express are going to be the views of their own views, not necessarily reflecting Microsoft or Voices for Innovation. But I think it's great to have them on because we want to have a really terrific, interesting conversation with them. So with that, I believe, Alexander, you're starting. Should I turn it over to you?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you mostly for the opportunity to have this discussion with you all. What we're going to do is we wanted to focus the discussion around two of the top risks that Eurasia Group identified at the beginning of 2017 as kind of, 'cause every year we put out a list of 10 top risks in January of every year, and that we think will, kind of geopolitical or political risks that will affect markets or multinational corporations or different sectors. And we wanted to kind of focus this call around two of them. And one of them, as it happens, was the number one top risk for 2017, which we called Independent America. And I'll talk about what that means in a little more detail, but basically the idea that a Trump presidency that places Americanism before globalism, as he said, carries significant implications for geopolitics, politics, and market functioning. And then the second risk we wanted to focus on, which Paul will focus on in detail, is what we called Trump versus Silicon Valley, the tensions both in terms of ideological outlook and sort of policy inclination that we are likely to see between the Trump White House and Silicon Valley. And by Silicon Valley, we sort of mean that as a thumbnail for the broader kind of tech industry as it stands. But first, Independent America. So what we mean by this is really, if you remember that when Trump accepted the nomination at the Republican National Convention, he said, "Our credo is Americanism, not globalism." So what we mean by Independent America is that we see an administration that is declaring independence from a number of things, declaring independence from the idea that it is the United States' responsibility to play an indispensable global role in security. Independence from the consensus that U.S.-led globalization is in America's interest. Both of those ideas are now decidedly being buried. This is a White House that is going to take a foreign policy approach that is transactional rather than value-based. Right? This is not a White House that is going to be placing the spread of democracy, liberal institutions, and freedom as such at the center of its foreign policy. This is a White House that has clearly stated that it is going to conduct its affairs in the world on the basis of a zero-sum transactional calculus of what is good for the American economy. And their view of what is good for the American economy is a more isolationist is not the right way to put it, but it's an economic view that puts industrial policy back into the agenda. It's an economic view that is suspicious of multilateral trade. And I think the best way to think about it is that it is an economic policy view that for the first time in 30 years places the grievances of globalization's losers at the center of policy rather than the benefits of globalization's winners. And that is a crucial thing to understand, I think. I mean, when we look at some of the policy choices that the Trump administration has said it would like to make, right? We haven't seen a whole lot of actual policy yet. But the basic ethos here and the idea is that the people who got a raw deal from globalization, in trade terms, in technology terms, in immigration terms, those people are the core constituency for this White House, and those considerations are guiding at the highest level the considerations on certainly on economic policy. On foreign policy more broadly, this is an administration that it looks like is going to put the fight against radical Islamic terrorism, as they are keen to make sure, we know that they're calling it that, as sort of the organizing principle for foreign military engagement and for foreign policy. This is in part why we can see, notwithstanding the revelations or the scandal that surrounded Mike Flynn, this is partly why we can see a kind of rapprochement between Trump and Putin. Whether that translates into a broader rapprochement between Washington and Moscow, I think is a longer and maybe more nuanced story. But certainly the shared focus on Islamic extremism and the kind of demotion of the idea of liberal values as an organizing principle for international affairs is one of the things that brings Trump and Putin on a personal level into alignment. More broadly, as the U.S. pulls back from Bretton Woods institutions, the implications are that we're going to see a more fragmented regulatory and global governance space. Right? For many years, we have talked about, call it what you will, the rise of the rest, the rise of China. Our president, Ian Bremmer, has coined the term the G0, a sort of multipolar world in disarray. All of those factors have been going on for about at least 10 years, right, with the economic growth and enfranchisement of large emerging markets, above all China, but others as well. The difference now is that it's no longer solely the case that U.S. relative power is being eroded by the rise of competitors for that power, but now that the U.S. is deliberately removing itself from the linchpin role in global economic and security and governance affairs, right? You've already seen some hostility from the White House towards the Bretton Woods institutions. We think that that's likely to continue, and so that what you get ultimately is a more fragmented trade space, a more fragmented regulatory space, and I think above all, and this is I think crucial for firms in the tech space, and this touches on some things that Paul will go into, is a more fragmented landscape of values. In the sense that in a world where economic nationalism rises, in a world where governments feel themselves to be to have have greater run for establishing norms and values vis-a-vis multinational companies, vis-a-vis the populations of other countries or the governments of other countries, it's very easy to run a situation where companies that are increasingly forced to relocalize their operations can run into value conflicts, right? If you're doing business with President Erdogan, does that create a problem for you if you are also trying to penetrate European markets? If and as there is a greater falling out between the U.S. and China, which side do you stand on? If you're operating in Russia, how do you bridge the fact that Russia is going to be caught in between conflicts between the United States and China and between the United States and Iran? So I think there's the kind of regulatory aspect and the kind of sort of trade aspect of this fragmentation as the U.S. pulls back. But I think crucial for companies to think about is the values aspect of it as well. We saw a lot of that come up here at home in the reaction of certain sectors to the immigration ban that wasn't a ban but was said not to be, but actually was, right? And above all, we saw that from Silicon Valley, right? And that was the immigration question is somewhere on the spectrum of political debate in the United States, right? The approach that the Trump administration took pushed the bounds of the acceptable spectrum, and a lot of people responded negatively, and the sector that responded most negatively and most vociferously was, of course, the tech sector in Silicon Valley. So I think with that, let me turn over to Paul to talk about the Trump administration versus Silicon Valley risk, and then we can kind of do Q&A all together at the end, unless people have absolutely burning questions about the Independent America risk that can't wait till the end.
Alexander, there's just one question, and maybe now is a good time to do it, and that is,
Sure.
how did you come up? I have your list up of the top risks right now. How did you come up with that list, or what was the criteria you were looking for?
So
in
every
developing
year,
this?
great question. So every year around, I guess, late October, we form an internal committee at Eurasia Group to just kind of start spitballing ideas for the top risks for the next year. And it takes 2.5 months or so to really hone them. We start off with 30 different ideas, and by the end we get down to 15. And then through a quasi-democratic process that is ultimately not very democratic, because Ian Bremmer and our chairman Cliff Kupchan pick the best 10 that they like. We kind of winnow them down. But what we try to do every year is have a nice mix of thematic and global risks, as well as a couple of key country risks, right? So on the 10 risks for this year, we have a specific one on Turkey, we have a specific one on South Africa, we have a specific one on North Korea, we have a China specific one, and then there are more thematic ones, right? Like Independent America, tech versus Trump, politicization of central banks was one of our risks. Impact of technology on the Middle East was another risk. So it's an iterative and deliberative process that goes on for a couple of months, and we try to balance thematic with specific risks, and always, risks that are going to matter for global business, right? I mean, that we try to really tease out the implications. Where does the rubber meet the road on this stuff?
Okay, thank you.
Does that answer it? Okay, good. Well, that's a great segue to taking a little deeper dive into our number 7 risk, which is Trump versus Silicon Valley. I think when we first did this, we were thinking initially more broadly of some, the sort of underlying tension that Alex mentioned between, increased automation and artificial intelligence and the loss of jobs and the Trump administration's emphasis on job creation. And so that's certainly sort of a larger issue, the perception that Silicon Valley is out of touch with Middle America, et cetera, et cetera. So there's that sort of general background to the whole thing. But I think we pretty quickly started looking at some of the really hard policy issues, which most of which, as we'll talk about, ends up becoming pretty complex. And what we were operating on in late last year were, for example, some statements by people close to the new administration or people who might be appointed, because obviously we don't have a clear sense of real when it gets beyond the sort of general policy direction of emphasis on jobs and emphasis on pulling back from globalization, et cetera. When you start getting a little more specific, we didn't have a lot to go by, because some of the key players, we didn't really know who's going to occupy them. We still don't, to some degree. So I will have to caveat my comments with that. There's obviously a lot of flux and still a lot of unknowns going on here. But in general, I think what I'll try to cover are some of the really what we view going forward as some of the really tough issues that will come up. I think Alex mentioned the ban on immigration. Now, that was sort of an unexpected bonus in a sense, right? So which made our risk right off the bat almost in the new administration. We hadn't thought that been considering that particular type of immigration issue. We were focused on things like H-1B, which we'll talk about, and how that would come up, and that has and will come up again in the new administration. But the ban obviously has already created a tremendous deal of sort of driven a new wedge between at least the sort of working level people within the tech industry. So going back just briefly, in December, of course, we had the Trump the big summit in Trump Tower where a number of industry leaders were summoned, and that was an attempt to obviously to develop some goodwill. How quickly that has dissipated, of course, with the immigration ban. So there's still, and we've seen, for example, this Uber CEO pull out of the advisory committee. So we did a piece about it just before the Uber CEO pulled out of the advisory committee, saying that a lot of the tech leaders are probably reconsidering their willingness to serve on some of these advisory committees and councils for the administration. So we'll see. That remains to be seen how that plays out. But so we've had basically an attempt to reach out, the immigration ban, and then the blowback from that, and then we're sort of in a little bit of a limbo to see how this will play out with the immigration ban, what will go forward, and how that will continue to affect the relationship. But so with that sort of broad overview, let's jump into. I think you can go ahead and change slides here. One thing I'm trying to emphasize throughout here is that we're watching very closely all of the new appointments in Washington and in various parts of the administration to get a better sense on some of these issues, and that has posed a real challenge. I will note also that with the EO. The fact that particular executive order on the immigration appears like it was not coordinated broadly within the administration. Perhaps there's a lesson learned there. So we've seen some other executive orders which we can talk about that affect the tech industry where it seems like there's been a little more sense of we need to get this right before we start dashing out executive orders. So that's a good thing, I hope.
Hey, Paul, I'm on slide 8. So I just want to make sure I'm on the right slide with your big picture, Trump.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
That's slide,
all right, good. That's where I want to be. All right.
I just wanted to jump in just to some very specific, one of the issues. So again, there were these, as we looked at this risk, we were looking at sort of the broader issue of how Silicon Valley and the broader tech industry, and again, we're going to have to generalize here, but there are obviously a lot of differences between some of the companies, and depending on the issue here. So I don't want to be too always generalized, but we'll talk about some of the specific differences. But one of the big issues that we had thought early on would come up is encryption, and as I'm sure you're aware, after last year's iPhone encryption San Bernardino process, which was never really resolved in terms of how we go forward on that. This issue we think is likely to come up early, because if there's another, for example, God forbid, a domestic attack, and there's an encrypted phone involved, then this issue is going to come up. So as we look ahead, of course, on this, most of the appointees that in the new administration that would be important in this. For example, the new Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, and CIA Director Mike Pompeo have made statements that suggest that they would favor some sort of mandated encryption. Although Pompeo has stepped back and said he views this as an issue where there's a real need to build public support, because this is a very public issue, and bipartisan support, importantly, in Congress. So I think there's a realization that on these issues like encryption, and we'll talk about surveillance in a minute, these are issues where the administration can't simply issue an executive order, for example, and try to change some of the things they might not have liked about the previous administration. They're going to need to build public support and most importantly, bipartisan support. So many of the issues, once you get beyond, again, the sort of generalities about how there may be tension, how there's tension between Trump and Silicon Valley, you pretty quickly get into a situation where there's going to have to be a big on any of these issues, there's going to have to be a big congressional piece to it, and then also the private sector is going to have, for example, on encryption is going to be a big player in this. So, as I said, people like Sessions and Pompeo have talked about encryption, but and I think we're also now a year later from the iPhone. I think there's a realization that we're sort of now it's a much bigger issue because we have a lot of encrypted smartphone messaging systems, for example, like Signal and Telegram, WhatsApp, and they use strong encryption. How are we going to deal with those in terms of law enforcement? And then there have been a few proposals on this that have been for partial solutions, things like creating a new agency, a sort of a separate agency that would help domestic law enforcement with breaking some of the encryption. Germany has proposed setting up an organization. I don't think they're that far along on it. And then, but that doesn't solve the issue of for example, local law enforcement, where there are tens of thousands of local law enforcement agencies that are also dealing with having to be unable to break encryption on smartphones. So this issue, I think, is going to come up sooner than later. I think, again, after the initial strong statements on some of these, people like Pompeo have backed off a little bit and said and stressed bipartisanship. I don't know. Sessions did not, in his confirmation hearing, didn't really talk much about this issue. But in any case, if anything smacking of mandated backdoors would trigger a massive political legal conflict with the tech industry, and also the public would be weighing in on that. I think one of the second I think big and really even more complex issue that touches on has many angles to it in terms of the tech industry is surveillance. And so in 2017 we're going to have a lot of issues coming up related to surveillance, and how the new administration approaches this issue is really, again, I would say a pretty big unknown. I mean, we have had statements here, for example, from Pompeo in an op-ed last year, which, and this refers specifically to metadata collection, which we can talk about, which is another controversial issue, which was as you may know, was transferred to the telecom company control after the Snowden revelations in the run-up to the revising of the FISA Act, the FISA Amendment Act. So, but in any case, these already, if you look in this space, we've had an initial sort of surprise, which was an executive order that came out, I believe it was last week, relating to public safety in the U.S. And there was a reference in there to the Privacy Act not applying to non-U.S. citizens. And in the initial reaction, for example, from the European Union was consternation, because they felt that this was not in keeping with the spirit of the Privacy Shield Agreement, which was signed last year between the EU and the U.S. after lots of back and forth, and allows cross-border data flows between the EU and the U.S. And it's a very important agreement for many companies, of course, doing business in the EU and the U.S. And that's a sort of a fragile deal. And the initial reaction was that this one paragraph in the EO, which didn't seem to really be that important, would have an impact on this. Now, after people's cooler heads sort of prevailed, they looked at this and said, well, this really doesn't affect the Privacy Shield, because the Privacy Act here does not underpin the agreements that form the basis for Privacy Shield, for example. But as you can see on the slide there, that what does underpin the Privacy Shield agreement is the so-called Presidential Policy Directive 28. And in this case, Pompeo, again, who's quoted there, has at one point called for the revoking of PPD 28. It's seen by some as sort of giving away too much about our collection and surveillance programs, while not getting any reciprocity and similar transparency from, for example, the EU. So in 2017, the Privacy Shield will come under review in the EU. So anything that would impact that is going to be under close scrutiny. So, for example, when President Trump's some of his appointees are on record as saying we should revoke this. Now, Pompeo has stepped back from that again in his confirmation hearing. If you read his written testimony, he has been very careful to say that that there would have to be a lot of consultation on this, and this is an issue that would affect our allies, and so we need to. There's a sense that this is not going to be rushed into. But of course, going into going into this period where there seems to be a preference for striking down any executive orders that from the previous administration, and perhaps issuing new ones or modifying them, we could see something on this issue coming out. My sense, though, is given the fact that again, this is going to be a really contentious issue, and there's going to be a need to build public support and support in Congress for anything that would take a look at overturning or modifying something like TPD 28. I think it's unlikely to be, at least initially, a priority of the administration. Although, again, that could change if there's a terrorist attack and there's a perception that the U.S. Does, across the board on surveillance needs to tighten things up or needs to make modifications. So there's a lot of wild cards here on the surveillance issue. And then just again looking ahead, there are issues like the renewal of the FISA Amendment Act, the Section 702 collection. I won't get into the details. It's kind of a complex issue, but that involves again the collection of bulk data, and there are in some cases there's a perception that EU and non-U.S. citizens are still not necessarily treated as well, and so that debate could also factor into issues like Privacy Shield. And I think in general, we're at a point now, and I have a nod to it on the last slide, but I want to make sure I leave enough time for questions, is that we're sort of in a world where countries, the issue of law enforcement access to data around the world is really becoming a salient issue. And some of the U.S. laws, for example, are outdated and don't allow certain kinds of access, or there's a perception that it's too easy in some cases for the U.S. law enforcement to reach out, and so that has led to initiatives for some countries to try to have data localization, for example. So I think 2017 is going to be a year when a lot of the issues of law enforcement data, cross-border data flows, how countries protect privacy, these are all issues that are going to be at play, and how the administration approaches all of these issues is really, as I mentioned, it's still a bit of an unknown, because we have the statements, we have sort of a general sense, but because much of the policy apparatus is still in flux and not in place, we're still reading the tea leaves on this. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, and then again, when we talk about Trump versus tech, right? Or Trump versus Silicon Valley. There's a whole other set of issues too, sort of more domestic focused, related to things like net neutrality, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And of course, we finally have a new FCC chairman, and he's talked about things like he's used that term, wanting to take a weed whacker to the FCC regulations. Now, I think his approach to this is a little more nuanced than the media. The media has sort of portrayed this very, very simplistically as, he wants to do away with net neutrality. I think if you read a little deeper on his views, he seems to really be against the Title II part of the net neutrality basket, which related to designating internet service providers as public utilities. I think he says he supports the underlying ideas of net neutrality. So that's going to have to play out too in the FCC, depending on who some of the other commissioners and how they're appointed. The issue of tax reform and repatriation is going to be on the table, but we don't think anything's going to happen on tax reform for quite some time. We have a really good our senior U.S. analyst John Lieber follows this issue very closely and has written a number of things that are very good and detailed on some of the options on tax reform that will affect the tech industry, and particularly things like repatriation. So I think if there are questions on that, we can certainly maybe do a follow-up and have him come in, because I think he has a really good handle on that. And then there's the H-1B issue, which is, again, we saw that an executive order leaked, a draft executive order, which raised a whole host of issues around H-1B. And I think the reaction to that leak, again, It's probably good that it hasn't been released yet. I think it's probably at this point any executive order that is as complex as something like H-1B and involves a lot of different players within the administration, the State Department, a whole range of other players that would have to weigh in on this. I think it's probably something that will be addressed because again it was a campaign issue for Trump, and so I think there will be action on this. But if you read the text of even the one that leaked, the latest draft, it looks like there's a lot of pushing out of and studying the problem, looking at the impact of worker visa programs in general, how they impact the U.S. jobs, and so I think there are some themes out there that are probably going to, and there are some changes coming down the road. For example, this idea of prioritizing the H-1Bs based on on companies that are paying certain salary levels. And so I think there will be change, but I think it's probably going to be put off for a while until this issue is taken up. And then there's also congressional action on H-1B that Zoe Lofgren has a bill, and I think along with Darrell Issa has proposed a bill, again raising the salary requirements and eliminating things like the master's degree exemption on H-1B. So I think the issue will be really important and come up, but I think the new executive order will probably be a little bit better thought out than some of the other executive orders, and will have been coordinated before it comes out. But certainly, I think this year the issue will be addressed because again, that's on the things that were clear campaign issues and where promises were made, or at least were referred to. I think are a big will be a big part of will still be priorities for the administration. Let me jump to the next slide in the interest of time here, and just mention briefly cybersecurity. This is another area again where the Trump team talk a lot about cybersecurity in sort of very general terms. And again, we've seen another draft executive order. I think that there's two on this issue. And again, this is primarily focused on U.S. government, critical infrastructure, but of course, because it's focused on critical infrastructure, it has a big private sector component to it. And I think, again, there was a lot of, the first draft of this thing was not very, was sort of criticized pretty heavily by people who read it carefully and who understand some of the issues. So the second draft was, I think, generally thought of as being better and more well thought out, and referenced some Obama-era documents that were important. So it wasn't just starting from scratch. Although I think there was still a sense that there was a lot of studying of the problem, and that maybe not enough really concrete proposals for better, for example, better information sharing between the government and private sector critical information infrastructure providers. So we'll have to see how this is something I think that's caught up in the process of developing the whole cyber bureaucracy within the government. And so we have there is they reorganized within the National Security Council how cyber is handled. So it's now under the Homeland Security Advisor Tom Bossert, who's a very well-respected official and has a lot of experience on this. But I think because some of the other positions are not filled, sort of a coherent getting to a coherent executive order, and then a policy process that can implement whatever is the proposals are, new proposals on things like cybersecurity, is still challenging because of some of the turmoil. And of course, now we've just had the resignation of Flynn as the National Security Advisor, and he was also in the cyber chain in terms of reporting and how things move forward. So I think on cybersecurity, the administration is definitely struggling to determine priorities. I think that if you look at the new executive order, again, a lot of studying of the problem and pushing things out and doing reviews, and then making recommendations. So I think with that, why don't we, since I don't want to drone on too much longer, let's take some questions on both of these risks, and happy to answer in more detail some of the things we talked about. I know it covered a lot of areas.
Yep. No, thank you. That was a great overview. So there are a few questions in our message box. So let me start with the first one. There's a question about Microsoft's President and General Counsel Brad Smith's proposed digital Geneva Convention. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It was something he's talking about. Um,
I
if
saw the,
you,
I saw the, I saw, I think it came out yesterday.
yes. So I don't know if you wanted to, if you're able to, or would like to comment just about the broader policy implications for our industry. What I would imagine, is countries coming together and making under that sort of format to come up with policy areas when it comes to digital and I would say data.
Yeah, I think it's a really timely proposal. I think one of the challenges, as I've mentioned, is sort of the broader problem of internet governance, which we follow pretty closely here. And basically, again, I'm sure people are familiar with. You basically have the two camps, which are the U.S. And Europe, and then China and Russia, for example, favoring different models of internet development and things like cyber sovereignty. So I was in China actually late last year for the World Internet Conference in Wuzhen, and that's something that China, for example, is touting as a platform to put forward its view of cybersecurity. So I think so you have several processes going on here. You have sort of a global multilateral process going on that's looking at things like norms, cyber norms, which were some of the things that were raised in this digital Geneva issue. So you have a sort of a multinational process that includes, for example, the government group of experts at the UN, which has put forward proposals for cyber norms, things like not attacking critical infrastructure in peacetime, and those are sort of that process has been going on for quite a while, moves very slowly. And although in the last year and a half, there's been some progress where China, for example, and Russia and some of the players in GGE have signed on to this idea of no espionage, for commercial gain supported by government, and the critical infrastructure, no tax on critical infrastructure. But again, this is a sort of a non-binding agreement that doesn't have any real enforceability. So at the same time as that's going on, you also have a lot of bilateral efforts. The U.S. and China, for example, have been talking now for almost 3 years under various agreements, and the most recent one was as a result of the Obama and President Xi signing an agreement in September 2015, where China finally signed on to this concept of not using cyber means to steal trade secrets and for the benefit of its industry. Since then, there have been a number of bilateral dialogues between the U.S. and China on things like cybercrime and focused fairly narrowly on cybersecurity issues, but not. I think they did not get into some of the issues that were raised in Brad Smith's statement on digital Geneva. And I've been meaning to take a closer look at this. I think it was, in my initial read on it, was it all made a lot of sense. The problem is still that countries like China have a very different view on some of these issues, and increasingly Russia. And so, for example, China just in its new cybersecurity law has included things like data localization and other issues. And Russia has been enforcing very vigorously its data localization laws with LinkedIn, as I'm sure you're aware. So I think the challenge is what is the right forum for these kinds of issues? Is the UN the right forum? The ITU? It's a tricky. To get international agreement on some of these issues, I think is going to be difficult. I think that the proposal was a good one, but I think it's going to be a challenge. And again, with the new administration here, the cyber issue, it's not clear how this will be viewed specifically in terms of norms building, which was a priority of the Obama administration, a big priority. And a lot of work done on the cyber norms issue, for example, and trying to get some international agreement. And of course, the Chinese have proposed a slightly different set of norms, along with Russia. So I think that it's an issue that is out there. China is eager to take the lead on this, as we've seen in the last year, particularly. But I think that this is going to be a challenge to get governments engaged, sort of both at the bilateral level and then on a sort of more global view. You've also had recent developments like the Tallinn Manual, which is a NATO effort to define, for example, the application of international law in peacetime in cyberspace, and that they just issued that about a week ago. I'm still taking a look at that, but I think that's another important piece of the puzzle. That's the kind of thing that could become accepted widely, and I think that it resonates with some of the stuff in the Digital Geneva proposal. But again, this is a very salient issue because there's a perception that something needs to be done to get agreements of acceptable behavior in the cyber domain.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of discussion about immigration. And so I'm going to try to sort of sum a question up here. So the upheld temporary immigration ban does not directly impact H-1B visas, but there's a sense, or at least the questioner has a sense, that the tech industry, media, others kind of are placing these issues into the same bucket. So do you feel like that's happening? How do you think we should be talking about or differentiating these issues?
Well, yeah, I think they're definitely very different issues, right? And I believe it may be that some H-1B small number got caught up in this, but in the immigration ban. But so I think, they're very different issues. I think that with H-1B, there's the issue. There's a perception also in the media that H-1B is abused by some companies, like Indian body shop companies have abused this, and American workers have suffered, and Indian workers are replacing Americans. So there's definitely the media, and again, as you look, the more you look at this issue, it's a very complex issue because some companies are using H-1B the way it was intended, and others are not. And so I think there's a general feeling, and that's bipartisan in Congress too, and as I said, and I believe in the new administration, that some modification has to occur to the H-1B program. And so I think once maybe the dust settles from this immigration ban, that the media will maybe do a little homework and understand that this issue is a little more complex and shouldn't be conflated with the immigration ban. I don't know how that will play out over the next several months, because this issue with the courts and how the administration is going to react to that, if this continues to percolate, it creates the perception. I think both of them. The problem is both of them create the perception that there's a sort of unwelcomeness in the U.S. To workers in general. So I think that's where some of the conflation comes in. The media has a lot of stories about other countries wanting to take advantage of this, both because of the immigration ban, because the perception that H-1B is going to be modified and that's going to make the U.S. less welcoming, which is really not the case. I think that, again, if you look more deeply into it, it's not that simple. But I think that there's a growing meme out there, if you will, that other countries should be stepping up and being welcome to workers who may not find such a warm reception in the U.S. So I think that perception is going to be hard to I think to dispel. And maybe what will happen is if there is a vigorous debate over H-1B and the merits and the value of it, and how and where some of these issues can have a little more clarity shown on them, and not be sort of an uninformed dialogue to take place on these. I think that will help. But it's hard to say how when the fear over the ban will dissipate a little bit, so there can be room for a more serious discussion of issues that are I think more important in some sense.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, we are at time for the webinar. So again, I wanted to thank Alexander and Paul for their time today. and thank everyone for joining. It was a interesting discussion as well going on in the message box. So thank you for your comments and opinions as well.
Can I see the messages or get those on the line?
Yeah,
okay,
I'll be able to share those with you. So thanks again, and thank you very much. And again, we will share the slides out, and we can I'll share the recording as well. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day. And Paul and Alexander, thank you again. Bye.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.